stop doing these exercises for your back. I'm gonna show you some of the worst exercises for your back, and I'm gonna give you a sweet replacement, and we're gonna start right now. So how can we break down what a bad back exercise is? And I think if we can just go through this ranking and say, all right, first, if we struggle to get a large amount of stimuli, or we can't really get a stimulus, we can't get that response, it's probably gonna be a bad exercise. Okay, second, easily here, if we're at a risk of injury, right? If we're putting ourselves at a substantial risk of injury, that's gonna be another bad exercise. And then finally, if we have to use other muscle groups, I'm talking about exercises here where we want a little bit more isolation specifically on the back. So if we have to use our hamstrings or other areas to lead to that growth in our back, it might not be the best back exercise. That's something that we have to keep in mind. When we're focusing on these specific movements here, we want movements that are really specific to blowing up our back. Okay, so when we're gonna be talking about our back, we actually have to identify what are those specific muscles, okay? So first, let's go right into it. I believe the deltoids need to be discussed as part of our back. A lot of people are gonna be like, what? No way, that's shoulders. But rear delts especially are going to be back-based. If we're looking at someone's back pose, that's going to play a major role. If we're looking at sports movements as well that involve the back, the rear delts are gonna play a major role. And if we think about the delts, right, they're gonna be responsible for adduction, okay? So adduction. They're also gonna be responsible for abduction, okay? So that's some key concepts that we have to understand. That's gonna take us into the next muscle group, and that's gonna be the latissimus dorsi. So in Latin, latissimus is wide, dorsi is back, okay? So we can think about this as the V part on our back. We're looking at the back of a bodybuilder and we can see those big wings, okay? That's going to be the lats. That's what we're gonna be focusing on. And the lats are gonna be really responsible for a lot of posture control. Also responsible for, if we're getting up off of a chair, we're actually stabilizing with our lats and a little bit with our triceps. And then we're gonna get into, even if we're doing a pull-up and we're pulling that chest forward, okay, we're pulling our chest to our hands, that's going to be lat activation. And then that takes us into our traps. So the big yoke that we wanna look at, but that's gonna be where we see things from the top of our back all the way down to the inside, central part of our back. That whole region is really going to be the top part of that X that we might see. Okay, so the traps are up here, the lats are on the side, right? If we can think about that, and what are they responsible for? So these big, huge traps, they're gonna be responsible for, one, stabilizing the spine, stabilizing the neck, but also two, for a lot of the motion of the scap, okay? So if we think about elevation of our scap here, or depression of our scap, or even retraction here of our scap, that's all going to be based around predominantly the traps. Also going to be responsible for that is going to be our rhomboids. The rhomboids and the infraspinatus are going to be responsible for sort of supporting the trap, but also for a lot of that elevation, depression, retraction of the scapula, making sure our shoulder stays healthy as we move all around. The back is extremely complex, so we've got to remember that when we're trying to figure out these different movements that suck. So there's a lot of key muscles in the back, and there's a lot of other little players that come into mind, but we got to focus first on those key factors as we're looking at what exercises are the worst ones that you're doing, and we've got to get rid of them. There's a lot of muscles in the back, but there's only one way to make sure that you keep getting garage strength videos, and that's by clicking on the subscribe button, ring that notification bell. We're going for 1 million subscribers, baby. So the first worst exercise for your back is going to be a standing reverse trap raise. Now, bear with me here. I don't think this movement is horrible. I still do this movement. I do think it has a lot of benefits, but there's a couple key factors here. When we're doing this exercise, okay, I'm pulling like this. Typically what tends to happen is we're breaking at the hip. We break at the hip, and then we actually work for that hip extension. And we end up using a lot of our hips to bring that up. Now, that means that we can overload on the eccentric, and we can use that eccentric portion to train the rear delts, to train the traps, and really blow up our traps. But that doesn't mean it's the best. I believe it is one of the worst. And so what I would tend to do, because remember, if we look through that lens, the lens was based around using 1, stimuli, 2, other muscle groups, and then 3, potential risk of injury. Okay, so now to fix that, we can go here and try and isolate the rear delts, the infraspinatus, the supraspinatus, the traps a little bit more. And then finally, if we want to make this really, really good, we can move in here. I'm going to make sure I don't break my mic. I'm going to lie down and I'm going to go here, okay? And now this really, really isolates traps, more medial delts, but also rear delts as we're going through this. And the main thing here is my traps get super, super pumped when I do this. So I recommend doing this from a seated position or from a lying down position, and really try to focus on the nice controlled eccentric, especially when we're doing this in a lying position. I like doing 4 sets of 25 to get a huge pump in that upper back. Oh yeah. Okay, that second worst exercise for your back. And remember how we're filtering this. If we see a potential where other muscle groups are being used, that's a problem. If we see a potential where the load isn't the best, that's a problem. That's how we're ranking this. It doesn't mean it's the worst exercise that you should never ever do. I still do most of these movements, but there are issues with this movement. That second exercise is gonna be a 1-arm row. Now, typically the problems that we'll see, especially with high school meatheads, is that we're gonna get into a position and the lifter's gonna be here, and they're gonna start yanking like crazy. They're barely gonna lock out their elbows, so they won't get to this point. They'll get to about here, and they're just ripping back and forth, okay? And then all of a sudden, they hurt their lower back, okay? They hurt their shoulder. They get themselves in a weird situation because they just wanna use a ton of weight. They wanna do it as quickly as possible with as shorter range of motion as possible, and that's where a lot of those issues come from. It's still a great movement if you have better form, but you have to be aware of that. Now, the reason why it's one of the worst exercises is because there's a better alternative, and that's where we're gonna go next. Is that we're gonna go into a dumbbell chest row. So we're taking that worst, and we're going into a dumbbell chest row, okay? Now, I'm here, and I even like to get a little bit of protraction here, so that's gonna help light up our rhomboids, infraspinatus, our traps even. Then I wanna retract, okay, here. Boom, like this. Row. Do that again. Row. Row. One more. Whoops. Remember back to when we talked about the back muscles, rhomboids, infraspinatus, traps, lats. We just hit all of them when we did this chest supported row, and we're being stable, so we're not using our hip. Okay, when we're doing the 1-arm row, we're using the hip. We're cranking a little bit more with our glutes, okay? So that's where that isn't the best. We take that out, we replace it with that dumbbell chest row. Now, inside of my programming, I do use the 1-arm row sometimes. I also use the chest row all of the time. And you can see that if you pick up our brand new app, Peak Strength, you can click on the link down below, and you're gonna get a nice pump when we give you those dumbbell chest rows. The other big factor is that when we're doing reps, if we're doing on the 1-arm row, let's say I could do 3 sets of 17 each side. Because I'm stable here with my chest, I can do 4 sets of 20, go a little bit lighter, get a better response because it's a little bit more isolated. So that's one of those big factors with the chest row. We can get a little bit more reps without putting our back in a precarious position. Oh shoot, this is the 3rd worst exercise for our back. Now, remember, why do we look at these exercises as bad back movements? What was I just doing? On that eccentric, I start to use that hip flexion into hip extension. I start to get into positions that I don't want to be in. I could put my back into a bad spot where I pull something, and that leads to a prolonged issue that then inhibits me from getting more swole. So that's why I don't like to use the bent over row, okay? There's other better movements when it comes to the bent over row. Is this a movement that you can still use? For sure, but it's one of the worst. That's why I'm taking this off the list. Now, how would I fix this? I'm gonna give you a little secret. With this, we're gonna do one of the best movements, and this is what we use with our top canoeer, Ian Ross, is a seal row, okay? So a seal row is very similar to the chest supported dumbbell row, but now I can go a little bit heavier. when we're looking at isolating the lats, rhomboids, infraspinatus, even a little bit of our lower back, it's hard to really go heavy. On the seal row, I can actually push this load pretty well. There's a couple key reasons. I can actually have a target to hit. Now, if you don't have an elevated bench like this, you can get a bench, put some bumpers under it, put some dumbbells under it, you can use that as your elevated bench. So here, what we like to do is we can put our feet at the bottom, okay? And I can use this as a target. That's also gonna target my rear delts. So one of the big factors here, if I can push that weight, I use this as target practice, and if I don't hit that, that rep doesn't count. That's why I love using the seal row to improve that back strength. I also like to superset this if I have an athlete that needs to strengthen their back, okay? We'll actually do this as the main lift where they're getting a really, really strong back. We're trying to strengthen their lats. We're not using that lower back. We're not using our hamstrings like we do when we're doing the bent over row. And we'll even superset this with things like dips or benches, okay? This is what we do inside of our at peak strength. We love to use supersets to help improve that time efficiency, but use the seal row instead of that bent over row. This is a 4th worst exercise for your back, and now we're gonna take this off of that list. We're gonna give you a better replacement, but that movement is going to be a long arm pull down. Okay, so we're gonna get into a position here, and we're gonna pull down, okay? So this does train the lats, a little bit of the rear delts, actually a little bit of the abs, even a little bit, but it's a pretty solid movement. Now, the problem is that as you get fatigued, people start to bend their elbows, and they tuck their elbows into their side here, and they turn a lat movement, okay, into a tricep movement. So we have to be aware of that, and if we're aware of that, now that means it's one of the worst back exercises. It's not the best to improve that lat strength, and it's not the best to improve that lat size. That's the other factor, is that when the weight gets pretty heavy or you get pretty tired, so one of those two, it leads to poor mechanics. So you can't really stimulate it with a heavy load, and you can't really lead to a point of a lot of metabolic stress because it also leads to technical breakdown. So that means it gets crossed off the list. Now, what can we replace this movement with that's still gonna get us a large amount of lat stimulation? That exercise that we're gonna replace it with is going to be a high ring pull-up, okay? This movement I absolutely love for lat development for a couple major reasons. One, we can get a little bit higher range of motion, right? We also can lengthen that lat like crazy here. Boom. We also can really put a lot of load on our lats. And when we get to the top, we retract, okay? If we think about our traps, rhomboid, infraspinatus, all of that is playing a key role in retraction. So not only are we training the lats, we're getting also a little bit of rear delts, but also the rhomboids when we're retracting the scaps. Now, for those of you that can't do pull-ups or you don't have access to high rings, I love using lat pull down, okay? So when we use our lat pull down here, we can use this or maybe even a little bit, just a hair wider, okay? But I love this handle. And if we get into a position, I wanna feel, I'm gonna try and take this off because I don't want it to get too muffled. I wanna feel that lat getting lengthened here, okay? Boom. Slow, controlled eccentric, back up, and I wanna pull the handle to my sternum. Boom. Lengthen, back down, okay? So we can do this, 10 controlled reps, boom, and then we can even get into a little bit of a crank. Now, I got a little bit out of position there. I started to use a little bit of swaying, so we gotta be aware of that. That does tend to happen as we get fatigued. But I really, really like using a lat pull down if we can't do high ring pull-ups or neutral grip pull-ups. Lat pull downs, we could go 5 sets of 7, 1 set of 25, get a huge pump. If we're doing those pull-ups, okay, let's do 4 or 5 sets of 4 to 5 reps. Put a kettlebell around your waist. That's gonna help increase that load and that intensity. And then you could do 2 drop sets to failure, trying to get to the point where you can get 20 straight pull-ups. Now, what's another worst exercise for your back? Remember, when we talked about the muscles, erector spinae was in there. Also, lats, traps, rhomboids, rear delts, all of those muscles, right? Those were all key players. So when we're talking about one of the worst exercises, I think one of the worst, most bland movements is going to be a glute ham raise. Okay, so glute ham raise, this is really gonna target our erector spinae. Yes, it will target a little bit of our hamstrings for sure, but if we're just here going la-di-da, okay, this is nice, easy. This is good for a warm-up. This is a great warm-up. But as far as training our back, it's not gonna provide a ton of load that's going to train our entire back. Now, in the past, in some of our sprint videos, we've given you some really, really cool exercises where we've done drop glute hams. We'll do things to train the hamstring. We'll do things to train that dynamic trunk control, all on the glute ham, okay? Now, we take that sports performance world where we train some of the best athletes in the entire world here on site at Garage Strength, and we actually are gonna give you one of the best bodybuilding movements to blow up your back across all fronts, and that's going to be a barbell raise on the glute ham. So we're gonna train the erectors, we're gonna train the lats, the rear delts, the rhomboids, infraspinatus, supraspinatus, everything. Okay, everything all at once. Here, so what I like to do, it's got our barbell, okay? I'm gonna focus here, I'm gonna pull up, okay? When I pull up, I'm gonna row, and I'm gonna go down nice and slow. So I'm here, up, boom. Ooh. 2 more. And I want to squeeze those lats at the top. Get the good pump, squeeze the scaps, hug the spine with the scaps, okay? I want to see that spine as stable as possible. This is an absolutely phenomenal movement to light up your lower back, to light up your lats, and to improve that dynamic trunk control that's going to carry over to posture control, better breath, and in turn, a more swole back. When we're doing this exercise, I like doing like 5 sets of 5, 6 sets of 4 to 6 reps. It's pretty complicated. Start with this to really light everything up, get everything moving, and then you can build into some of the other more isolating movements that can really focus on specific target muscles like just the lats or just the rhomboids. As we've said before, exercises, rep schemes, machines, these are all specific tools. And with that being said, it's important that all of those worst exercises for the back, those are all still good tools. But when you're using them, there's still a better option. There's still a way that you can get things done just a little bit more effectively. And that's going to lead to a better response, a better adaptation. And that's exactly what we did when we designed our app, Peak Strength. Inside of our app, you're gonna get specific exercises built for you to hit your main goals, built for your periodization, built for your specific sport, based off that timeline, and also providing you specific rest periods to help optimize your overall performance. And that's after you get those 7 days of free right in the beginning. So while you're checking out our Masters of Sport podcast, make sure you can download the Peak Strength app by heading over to peakstrength.app or the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. Because remember, freaks, if you guys want to become champions, you've always got to cultivate your power. Peace.